I moved my truck away from the water's right there, and so the calves they really like these trees right here, and so they'll drink water and they'll sit under these trees, and so I moved my truck away from the water so that they can it's some prime real estate, right? This area under the tree, it's a prime cattle real estate. They love that spot, so I got out of there so they can have that spot and they're not rubbing their head all over my truck. But okay, so the whole thing about the commodity market, and the whole thing about the commodity market, I was speaking about this a couple of days ago, is that granted that you're not a complete idiot, all right? Effectively, as long as you're raising beef cattle and you're putting on at least about 2.5 pounds a day, 90% of these animals are going to grade choice or prime, all right? Like 80% of your animals, 75 to 80% of the animals are going to grade choice, and about 10% is going to grade prime, and about 10 to 15% will grade select or lower, okay? And this is actually a very good way to look at it. And so unless you thoroughly understand how to have more than 10% of your animals grade prime, 10% prime is the average for the USDA facility. About 10% of the animals will grade prime. So unless you thoroughly understand how to get your animals to grade at a higher percentage of prime, unless you thoroughly understand how to do that, and you're going to market your animals to make extra money on the quality, you understand how to do this stuff. If you understand how to do that, then sure, it makes sense to, raise, 1+ type commodity animals, okay? 1+ type beef animals, okay? But, but here's the thing about the commodity market. Granted that you're not a complete ding-dong, granted that you're not a complete moron, effectively, if you have a beef animal that has at least put on at least about 2.5 pounds a day, and when the animal's 800 pounds, you should really be able to put on 3 pounds a day with very, very, very minimal issue. All right, my animals, as of right now, they are probably putting on a little bit more than 3 pounds a day. All right, the bigger ones are putting in the bigger animals are showing signs of becoming obese. They're turning kind of rectangular. And if they're turning kind of rectangular, that's a sign that they're putting on more than 3 pounds a day. And so, but that's the thing, it's like, granted that you're not a ding dong, right? Granted that you're not a ding dong, granted that you're not a complete idiot. If you have some kind of a beef animal and you raise that animal somewhat properly, your animal will effectively be a commodity animal, okay? And and it just is what it is, all right? Effectively, that's the market, okay? The commodity market is the largest sector of the beef economy, okay? The commodity market, effectively, if you go to a grocery store and you buy beef, you're buying commodity type beef, okay? And unless you thoroughly understand that you can actually, unless you systematically thoroughly understand that you have it in, like, you understand how to make more than 10% of your animals grade prime. If you legitimately have an understanding for how to make more than 10% of your animals grade prime, and you are going to market your animals for that extra, that extra quality of the beef, unless you thoroughly understand how to do that, it's just a waste of time. Being in, you're better off in the commodity market. You'll probably make more money in the commodity market. I mean, but the thing, and I'm not, and I don't want to, whatever, because the thing about commodity beef is that if it was easy to be in the commercial cattle business, everybody would do it, okay? So, I may be being too hard on y'all by just flat out saying you're an idiot, but, more or less, all right? Get it together, all right? There's no reason why you cannot put on, a 2 to 2.5 pounds a day. If you're legitimately putting on less than 2 pounds a day on a 500-pound animal, if you're putting on less than 2 pounds a day, you're legitimately doing so horribly bad that you could easily improve your situation. It might legitimately just be adding a little bit of grain to your animal's diet. It might be putting a little bit of fertilizer on your grass. That might be all you have to do, and it would legitimately put you in, at least you're doing, you're putting on at least two pounds a day. All right, if you have a 500-pound animal and you are putting on less than 2 pounds a day on that animal, you are doing so pathetically bad, it's borderline shameful. You could easily improve your life. You could easily improve what you're doing. You could easily improve it. It might legitimately just be put a little bit of fertilizer on your grass and feed your animals a little bit of grain. That may be all you have to do, and you could legitimately increase your output by 30%. You could increase the amount of money that you make by 30% just by doing that. All right, legitimately. All right. I'm just being as straightforward, honest about this as I can. There's no reason to beat around the bush. There's no reason to, be whatever. I'm just telling you it is what it is, all right? The feed values of your grass may be too low. You may have to fertilize your grass to improve the feed values. You may have to use some herbicide. All right, maybe you need to, feed your animals a little bit of grain to supplement their grass. And if that was all you did, you may legitimately be able to increase your output by 30% overnight. You could increase the amount of money you're making by 30% overnight. And I've spoken about the cattle business. The cattle business, when it comes down to it, I effectively make more money in the cattle business than anybody on the planet makes doing just about anything. I genuinely make money in the cattle business. I don't make money on YouTube. I don't care if I could even make money on YouTube. It doesn't matter to me. It's not going to be any significant amount of money. I make a drastic amount of money in the cattle business. I am set to do very, 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 very well for myself. It's going to be a lot of money. All right. I do very well for myself, and I actually make money in the cattle business. And if making money in the commercial cattle business was easy, if it was easy, everybody would be doing it. But as far, and I'm being as straightforward, honest about this as I can. Me, when I drive to a sale barn, I drive, sometimes I'll go to the north, sometimes I'll go to the northeast, sometimes I'll go to the south, sometimes I'll go to the southwest. I'll go in every direction. Sometimes I go to the northwest. I will drive in every direction. And to this day, I have not seen anybody even doing 10%. To this day, I have not seen anybody even doing 10%, legitimately. And I drive by tens of thousands of acres of farmland every single week. Even when I watch people on YouTube, and I take a look at their farm, a lot of these farms, they're YouTube farms. They're not making money farming. They're making money on their YouTube channel. I actually make money in the cattle business. And if I had a Bible, I would put my hand on it right now. I'm being straightforward, honest about it. All right. I make a lot of money in the cattle business. I actually make money in the cattle business. I make a lot of money. All right. And whenever I need money, I will start liquidating some of the bigger animals, and I will take that money and I will reinvest it, okay? Maybe here in about 2 weeks when the weather gets a little bit cool. I don't want to take my animals to the sale barn when it's 95 degrees and full-on sunshine outside. They're going to be miserable standing out there. And so here in about 2 weeks, the weather will drop, and I'll see if I want to take a set of steers to the market or not. And then I can reinvest the money and grow my business. But I make a drastic amount of money. If I took my 4 biggest steers out of out of this herd right now, if I sold my 4 biggest steers, I would probably make like $11,000. Now I make like 11 grand, and I'm buying these animals right now for a number. I actually bought a number 1 to 1.5 type of medium large frame steer. A couple days ago, I bought 2 of them for $1,400 a piece. And so, if I sell them for, $2,700, I mean, I make, and if you think about whatever the cost of the feed and whatever, but, right now, realistically, the feed doesn't cost me anything because I have these animals on grass. They are eating about 90% of their diet on grass, and I'm feeding them with a little bit of distiller grains. But the distiller grains puts weight on them, right? If I did not feed the animals the distiller grains, my animals would not be putting on this much weight. And so the amount of weight, the additional weight that the distiller grains puts on the animal actually turns the grain into a positive return. You know, and at the end of the day, the grain is also tax deductible. And so, you know, and this grass, I mean, you know, I do have to fertilize it and I do have to herbicide it. You know, but even if I fertilize and herbicide the grass, I mean, for me to grow enough grass to feed all 23 of these animals, it wouldn't even cost me $500 a month. So I don't care about no $500, all right? The $500 is negligible. And so, you know, it's whatever, right? The cost of feed is effectively negative for me. It doesn't matter, you know, it doesn't hardly make a dent. That's also the benefit of growing grass. I don't need any equipment to harvest it. The cattle walk around and they eat it. And as long as I keep track of the feed values of the grass, I can take a look at, you know, the feed values of the grass through many, many different ways, right? I can see if the grass has a flag leaf, if the grass is going to seed, right? You know, the animal's manure score. You know, there are many ways to keep track of the quality of the grass, right? And, you know, granted that I do that, you know, and I supplement them with a little bit of grain. You know, I may even be able to take my cost of feed negative if the price of corn goes up. If the price of hay goes up, I may even be able to take my cost of gains negative. I may be able to feed my animals, put weight on them, bale the grass, and then sell the grass for a positive return. It may not be a large positive return, but it will still be some kind of a positive return. You know, if the price of hay goes up, you know, to about $60 a bale, my cost of gains will actually go negative. And I have a large amount of land. If I legitimately think that I can make some money on hay, then I'll just grow more hay, right? And then I'll just sell it to a wholesaler, right? I'll just have it baled and sold. And, you know, and it doesn't matter. I mean, you know, but I make a large amount of money in the cattle business. And that's the thing about money, is that money's not an opinion. It's not an opinion, you know, and I've always said that there are benefits to making large amounts of money. There are benefits to making large amounts of money. I can't think of one benefit of being poor. I don't, you know, there is no benefit to being poor. There are benefits to making large amounts of money. Your family will probably have better opportunities. All right, chances are, you know, you'll just get more, you know, you'll get, you know, there are benefits to having large, to not having, because if you have a large amount of money, you know, there are benefits to being, you know, to being, you know, morally responsible about it. There are benefits to being morally responsible about making money and making large amounts of money. If you sell your soul to the devil for money, that's, you know, that's not good. Okay. You know, I don't sell my soul to the devil for money. I run beef cattle and that makes me money. Okay. I run beef cattle and that's what makes me money. I didn't sell my soul to the devil for money. I don't sell my soul to the devil for money. You know, I run beef cattle and I make a large amount of money. But, you know, very, 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 very soon, you know, and these animals here, I have 31 animals total right now. And if I sold the biggest, you know, and if I, you know, systematically sold them over the next 4 months and I reinvested the money, you know, if I just, sold, you know, that would be me selling about, you know, 7-8 animals a month. If I sold 7-8 animals a month for the next 4 months and I just reinvested the money, and I took a look at how much, you know, and I reinvested the money and I followed the business plan, I would end up making I would end up netting myself over $100,000 over the next 4 months. Netting myself. That's how much money I would net myself. And then I would leverage against it. All right. You know, if think about it as if, you know, if my 31 animals, if I sold 7 or 8 animals every single month for the next 4 months, that would be all 31 animals. And when I sold the animals, I took the money that I made when I sold the animals and I reinvested it back into my business and I followed the business plan. All right. That, you know, just that over the next 4 months would make me over $100,000, and I would reinvest all of it and I would leverage against it. All right. I don't scrape money off of my business. I reinvest all of my money. If I legitimately feel like I need some money or whatever it may be, $1,000, $2,000 here or there, you know, and at the end of the day, I have a credit card, right? And so, you know, I would take the money, from the money that I make on a monthly basis, the check that I have in my hand. I could take some of the money out of there. I'm not going to take the money out of my cattle herd. My whole thing is I reinvest all of my money back into my business, right? That's what I actually invest more than 100% of my income every year. The amount of money that I make on a yearly basis, I actually end up investing about 150% of what I make, 175% of what I make. And I make a large amount of money. And my whole thing about it is, if you're legitimately, my whole thing about it is, money's not an opinion, okay? It's not an opinion. And I am not a malicious person. If it comes down to it, if I think you're a retard, if I legitimately, if it's like you're whatever it may be, all right? Not whatever it may be, this is a very serious, thing, okay? If you're like what I call a net negative, a tard, if you're legitimately a net negative, all right, and you're selling your soul to the devil, and that's what then I don't, then I will kick you into a hole. All right, I'm serious about it, and this is not funny. This is not a joke. I'm not being funny about it. This is not a joke. All right, I don't save people. I don't argue with morons. All right. I sincerely pray for you. Understand that I pray for you. And I would hope that you turn your life around. But if you're not going to turn your life around and you're going down some downward spiral, stay away from me. I would kick you into a hole if that's what it come down to. If it came down to it, I would kick you into a hole. Understand that. All right? This is not a joke. All right? This is not a race for last place. What I call a race for last place, this is not a race for last place. It's not. Don't turn this into a race for last place, and I'm not joking about it. I keep my peace with God, all right? I didn't do some malicious thing for money. I make a large amount of money. I actually make more money in the cattle business than anybody on the planet makes doing just about anything, and it's by a lot. I do very well for myself. All right, and at the end of the day, I show you how I do it. That's the whole thing about this. I show you how I do it because why not? You have to understand that I legitimately make such a large amount of money, I can effectively do anything. I will probably end up with over $1 million just sitting there within 365 days. Over $1 million. And I will leverage against that money and invest it. And if I legitimately have a total invested sum of like $2 million, if I have $1 million sitting there, and I take a loan for but investing this amount of money will start to get very difficult. It will start to get difficult. At some point, I don't think I'll have any problems going to $2 million a year. But if we're talking about me investing $2 million, because if I have $1 million invested, and I take a loan for $800,000, that $1,800,000 will appreciate, right? I'm not going to invest all that money at the same time. That $1,800,000 will appreciate, and that will create the second pool of money, and that second pool of money will be, pretty substantial. It'll be several hundreds of thousands of dollars. It'll be several hundreds of thousands of dollars, and I would leverage against that too. And if we're talking about me leveraging, or me working with about over $2 million worth of assets, I would be making over $5 million a year. And that would be the amount of money that I'm making on a yearly basis. And so the amount of money that I am making is going up very quickly. It's going up very quickly, and I already make a large amount of money. If I had a Bible, I would put my hand on it, and I would swear. I don't know how else to put it. If I had a Bible, I would put my hand on it, and I would swear it. Unless something happens, like if lightning hits this tree and kills 10 of my cattle, then sure, things will change. if some drunk driver drives into my fence and and obliterates a portion of my fence, and 10 of my cattle escape, then sure, things may change. But granted that it just everything just goes okay, which there's a very real possibility that everything just goes okay. If I had a Bible, I would put my hand on it, and I would swear on that Bible that from what I see right now, and I'm also not like schizophrenic. I'm not like a mentally, I'm not like a delusional person. I'm not on drugs, all right? I'm not intoxicated. And if I were going to be straight up forward honest about this, I will probably net myself about $100,000 over the next 3 to 4, over $100,000 over the next 3 to 4 months. I will take the money from when I liquidate my assets. I will take that money and I will reinvest that money. And that money will increase the size of pool number 2, which is technically my money still. That's still my money. The money that I have on a monthly basis, I will leverage against that and reinvest the sum. As long as my entire balance sheet is under 20% leveraged, I'm not concerned about it. Or excuse me, it's under 80% leveraged. Is not over 80% leveraged, I'm not concerned about it. I don't have trouble sleeping at night. I don't, I didn't sell my soul to the devil for money. It just is what it is, all right? And I make a large amount of money. I don't know how else to put it. I legitimately make a large amount of money. A large amount of money.